Hi, this is Stephen Wilson, and you're watching Sonic Perspectives. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone. This is Scott Medina with Sonic Perspectives. Today we are sitting in with Stephen Wilson. Great to see you again, Stephen.
Likewise, thank you for having me again.
Yeah, wonderful. It's such a busy time for you right now. It's like you've got the album release coming up, the upcoming tours, record store signings, and most recently, this run of IMAX film premieres. Later today, on the day that we're recording this, you're about to do an online live stream event. So maybe let's start right there. And how have those film screenings been going?
Yeah, I mean, great fun. It was one of the things that was obviously a topic of conversation right near the beginning of the album campaign was how do you promote a record that just essentially has two extended pieces of music on it? So a lot of the traditional ways to promote records don't apply here, releasing singles, making videos, all that stuff. So we kind of decided very early on that we would make this screening concept one of the priorities, making a film, going out, letting people hear it in spatial audio, Dolby Atmos 5.1, in a room with a bunch of other people and with a film, which you can either choose to watch or you can close your eyes and just listen, whatever. Some people prefer just to listen. And so it's been great fun doing that. And I was in Rome, Berlin, Paris earlier this week. I've been all over the place this week. So doing those screenings and they're all tremendous fun. And I think people really appreciate, I think most of all people appreciate coming together to have a kind of communal experience of hearing a record because we don't get that a lot in the 21st century. I'm sure, like me, you grew up, listening to records with your friends. You'd have get-togethers and listen to music with your friends. We don't do that a lot, at least I don't. And so, this kind of communal aspect of screening a film and having a playback, I think, is something that people have really, really appreciated and enjoyed.
Sweet. Yeah, I know you did a little bit of that for the Harmony Codex, and it sounded like you wanted to do a little more widespread kind of tour of that format that it didn't seem really happen. So maybe you're sort of realizing some of that now in the walk up to the release of the album.
Yeah, exactly this. I think the Harmony Codex was like a dip in the toe, a dipping of a toe in the water as regards doing that kind of event. Um, and people really liked it, and so we've been very fortunate. All the screenings we've done have been full. People, I wasn't sure, if people would be into doing something like that, but they seem, as I say, they seem to really like the concept and appreciate it.
Nice. Sweet. Well, seeing as each of the two long form pieces are indexed into 6 to 8 different sections, maybe just start with contrasting your experience of bringing these individual songs together on this album versus how you approached it with the incident.
Well, I think this was written in a more flowing way. So, for example, some people ask me, well, did you write lots of individual pieces of music and then fit them all together? And the answer is no. This very much was written in the order that you hear it. And I think for me, that's what makes it, that's what I'm so satisfied about. It feels like a very natural journey. So each idea essentially led to the next idea. So when you're listening to the pieces unfold, you're listening to them unfold in the order that they were conceived and written. And for me, that seems to make it feel like a more natural. It's less of a bunch of pieces stitched together. It's more of a long song, if that makes sense. And there are a lot of themes that reoccur in different contexts, different melodies, different rhythms, bass lines even that are popping up in right throughout these pieces in different contexts each time. But I think they all kind of serve to give the piece a sense of flow and cohesion, which perhaps something like the incident didn't have, which was more like a bunch of bits that were kind of put together retrospectively, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I know you weren't, fully satisfied with the incident, it sounded like. And so but here it seems like you've really, hit your stride and found a way where it flows naturally and is satisfying for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of the incident, but it was an album that was made under some degree of pressure when I didn't necessarily have, one of the things I think that you know about me because we've talked before that is very important to me is this idea of not repeating myself. So every album for me has to have something about it that's fresh for me as much as anything else, but also I think for the listeners, something that's gonna justify its, you know, justify me adding it to my already substantial back catalogue. What is going to be different about this album? What is different about the overview that justifies me making another record, And I think here that was very clear to me from the beginning, and I felt very inspired by that. Way back in the days we were making the incident, I think it was almost like, well, we have to make the next record, and I didn't necessarily have anything new to say. So the the construct of it became a kind of conceit that was kind of my way to try and make it feel a bit more interesting than perhaps if I'm not really explaining this very well, but I think here it felt like a completely natural thing to go for the long form, to create an extended piece of music. The concept suggested it, um, and and that's what for me makes it so satisfying to listen to.
Yeah. Yeah, I know how important it is for you to not be repeating yourself, to do something new, gone where no Steven Wilson has gone before, so to speak. But on this album, it's like I do hear several references to the past,
Of
either
course,
either your solo works or
yeah.
even Porcupine Tree Days. And in some cases, they're almost like, specific quotes. And I kind of wonder just for a crazy second, is he placing these in intentionally as like Easter eggs to find out, or is this more representative just of, your sound at this point?
I think, well, you're making it sound like a very positive thing. I think it's probably the simple answer is I have a limited musical vocabulary. Of course I do. And there are certain things that I find myself coming back to, certain, harmonies, melodies. The answer to your question is it's not conscious. I'm very curious as to what you think you've heard, because it certainly wasn't deliberate. But at the same time, I'm going to completely own that and own up to that. I'm sure there are, I think every musician, certainly one like myself, who's made something like 50 records now in my career, you can't help sometimes but develop your own cliches and your own comfort zones. So of course, the caveat to what we were talking about a few minutes ago about the fact I like to reinvent myself with every album. The caveat to that is, of course, that I am limited in terms of what I'm able to do, and I do have my cliches and I do have my comfort zone. So even when I'm not consciously reverting to type, I probably am. But you know what? I also like that idea that there are perhaps little references back, and there is a sense of continuity through the catalogue. That's something I would probably enjoy in another artist's work. So
Right.
so I'm going to say, even if it's not deliberate, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, just to answer your question, I mean, some of them are like more obvious, like the spoken word of the alien, kind of like in detonation, like just a spoken word
Okay.
phrase.
Right.
Or yeah, more subtle would be like in the Buddha song. There's a really high pitch sound that then goes up a little bit, and it's there in Walk the Plank also. But I think Walk the Plank, it probably was Richard on keyboards, and in this album it sounds like it's guitar. Just
Right.
I heard this high pitch, and I'm like, oh, is it going to go up? And there it goes. Yeah,
Okay.
cool.
Well, like I say, I at the end of the day, I have my paint box, my Stephen Wilson paint box,
Which we
and
love, so that's great.
sometimes I use the same color in more than one painting to continue the analogy. So perhaps that's the
Nice.
answer.
Nice, I like it. I love Andy Partridge's collision of the earthly realm and the celestial realm on objects, meanwhile. And although in the press for this album, you've focused on our insignificance in the face of the vast cosmos, lyrics like these suggest that there might be some form of grand relation between us and celestial movements, even if it's just like a solar flare blowing out the power.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the whole idea of that section of music is is to contrast the great and the small. So, we as human beings have a tendency to get very absorbed in the kind of minutiae of our lives, the little soap operas, the little things that make us anxious or stressed or happy or whatever. So I think the idea to contrast the very kind of minutiae of everyday life, ordinary people going about their daily lives, small town lives, with these massive cosmic phenomena going on the other side of the cosmos, stars dying, nebulas crashing, black holes imploding. So to me, it all feeds into that idea of perspective, reminding ourselves just how minute a space we really take up in the universe as a whole. And of course, Andy, for me, is the best person at writing lyrics which are observational, observing everyday lives in small towns. He's just him and Ray Davis, I always think, are the masters of that kind of approach. Yeah.
Yeah, it was wonderful bringing him in again. And Stars Die, boy, that makes me think, you could probably do, I know you got three albums to represent on the upcoming tour, but you could probably do an entire tour just with, like celestial theme, like with back catalog
All the
songs
all
like
the
Stars
uh,
Die.
all the all the space themed stuff I've written over the years. Yes, probably a
Yeah.
fair amount actually. Yes, now I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one seems largely, at the core of it, it seems largely like a solo album. Like you're playing the bulk of the instruments, even including bass on this one. Was that conscious going into it that you wanted to do a lot of it, and then obviously with the drummers, but bring in a few guests afterwards, but that you were going to handle all of it, including the bass?
Yeah, I think it was partly down to the fact that I had such a strong idea of what this album was going to be. I mean, the funny thing about this album is that I had the title and I had the concept, and I kind of imagined it all in my head even before I'd written a note or a lyric. And that's unusual. I mean, I wish it was always like that. It makes things a little bit, I wouldn't say easy, but it makes it certainly easier when you've got a strong kind of like thread to follow right from the beginning. And here I really had that right from the beginning. So it was almost easier for me to just play as much of it as possible as as much of as I could myself, just to get the idea out, rather than having to take the time to explain to someone else what I was looking for.
Mm.
So I pretty much ended up, I think, tracking almost everything in about 6 to 8 weeks, the beginning of last year, 6 to 8 weeks. I just spewed all this out, this idea that I had in my head, the basic shape, the basic structure, most of the guitar, most of the keyboards, all the bass, a lot of the vocal parts, the harmonies. And it was only then that I started to think about bringing in other people. Probably, the last 20% or so of making of the record was bringing in the solo voices, bringing in the drummers to replace the program drums. So yes, I mean, I've said actually, it's probably the most solo record I've made in
Mm.
that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so for a song like Objects, meanwhile, where Andy's writing the lyrics, did you already have the music? And if so, did you even send it to him and say, write lyrics that fit in with this music, or was it the other way around?
So I had a basic idea. I had the idea that I just kind of outlined to you, and I had a few lines. So I had, for example, the line about the husband cheating on his wife. I already had that. And I had a couple of these sort of meanwhile things, this is going on Earth, meanwhile, this is going on the other side of the cosmos. And I had the melody. So Andy had a kind of strong starting point from that perspective.
Mm.
But we worked quite hard. Well, he worked quite hard developing that kind of imagery, and we've got lots of outtakes. You could go on and on and on writing little, small town stories and contrasting with cosmic phenomena. But the idea was to find two things which somehow connected, as you kind of pointed out, something that would connect with these little soap operas on Earth, something that would connect cosmically speaking with that, make sense to you as a metaphor in your head when you heard it.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems that Randy McStein's one of the musicians with the largest involvement on this album. So if you
Mm.
could speak to his contributions, including beyond just the two spotlighted guitar solos, which are pretty obvious, but I'm interested in how else he was involved with the shape of this and the arc of it.
So Randy's also in the big harmony blocks. You'll hear his voice in the big blocks of vocals there. Um, So, as you say, Randy played the two big showcase guitar solos on the record, but he also provided lots of little details. I mean, what I love about Randy as a guitar player, and this is why he's my favorite guitar player right now, at least in terms of collaborating with me on my work, is he's also someone very conscious of the sound design element of playing the guitar. I find with a lot of guitar players, there's a lot of fantastic guitar players out there can play amazing, play fast, play slow, play amazing, but they don't necessarily experiment so much with their sound and with their tone. And Randy is very interested in experimenting with tone, sounds, exploring the possibilities of processing and twisting and mutating sound. And what's interesting about that is for a guitar player, the sound will very often change the way you play, which I think is something that's very often overlooked with guitar, is that if you develop a particular sound, it can change the way you respond in terms of the note choices, the speed you play at.
Hmm.
Randy's very au fait with that whole process. So when I was working with him, particularly on the solos, we were actually looking for the sound before we were looking for the kind of the musical vocabulary that he was going to use to play in.
Huh.
And that's kind of just dotted right through the record, Randy providing these little moments of sound design. And I think that's one of the things that keeps you listening when you're listening to an extended piece is every little twist and every little turn, there's something new. So there's something new that's going to bring you back in, attract your attention again. You're not allowed to become blasé about what you're hearing. And a lot of those little moments come from Randy working with the sound design aspects of the guitar.
Yeah, it's nice to see you utilizing him so much, including mixing some of the tracks on his last solo album. The two of
Mm.
you seem to be in a similar headspace to some degree, so that's
Very
really
much. I mean, he's much younger than me. He's a different generation, and
right.
but I think what I like, as I say, it's just without wishing to repeat myself, what I like about him is he's very open to exploring the possibilities of the guitar. I think with an older generation of guitar player, sometimes it's hard to push them into new sonic areas. Randy, and because I consider myself to be a producer first and foremost, that's my number one interest. So to work with a guitar player that shares that interest is really inspiring to me and hopefully to him too.
And I'm curious though, why don't you take more guitar solos yourself anymore? I mean, I listened back to The Sky Moves Sideways or The Sound of No One Listening, and I realize how much I miss your lead playing.
It's very nice of you to say so. I think the simple answer is that I actually bore myself a little bit when I play the guitar because I kind of know what I'm going to do. And, this goes back to what we were talking about a few moments ago about, having limitations in your kind of musical palette.
Right.
And I think the guitar player, I am limited. And that's not to say that I don't have a sound, and I'm aware that I have a sound, and I'm aware there is something about, the way I play that is kind of unique. Um, so I think the simple answer to your question is I feel like I want to be more surprised by what other people might bring to the table, particularly when it comes to soloing. And when I solo, I kind of know what I'm going to do. I know the notes I'm going to go to, and I know the kind of style I'm going to adopt. So I think it is more inspiring to me to allow myself to be open to being surprised by something that somebody else plays that I wouldn't have played.
Hmm.
So, I've been playing guitar solos for 30 years. I just feel like it's probably time to, well, I mean, I still play the occasional solo. You'll still hear me playing some solos on the tour anyway. Let's say that.
Good. I was hoping so. Right on.
Yeah.
Um, so how did you decide to get Adam's son Russell involved on drumming on this album instead of just using Craig throughout?
So I've been following Russell on his Instagram page, and Russell, as you probably know, is much more into working in sort of the drum and bass genre and
Mhm.
electronic music. He's not a rocker at all. That's not really his style. His style is more to do with drum and bass and IDM and stuff like that. And I've been following him on YouTube, on Instagram, I beg your pardon, because I'm a big fan of that style of playing anyway myself, and I love a lot of that kind of music. And one of the other things, and in a way, this is all a continuation of what we've been talking about in principle, is this idea of allowing yourself to be surprised and opening yourself up to contributions that wouldn't necessarily be what you would naturally go for. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be really interesting to have a drummer like Russell, who's essentially a drum and bass drummer, respond to this 23-minute long conceptual rock epic?
Love it.
And
That's cool.
so it was an experiment. It was an experiment. But I always think that's what keeps music driving forward, isn't it? That's what I mean, a lot of people call me a progressive rock artist, and I think that's what being progressive is really about. Opening yourself up, creating new hybrids, working with musicians from across genres, so you create this kind of new approach to an older sound, if you like. So my motivation there was really just to be just curiosity, to experiment a little bit, to not do the obvious. And I think it's been a very successful experiment. I love the way he plays. He plays on the first side of the record. You can tell it's not. You can tell he's not your traditional rock drummer, but actually he's completely nailing it, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. I love it. Given that the album starts off with a conversation with an extraterrestrial being, what's your personal perspective on UFOs, life elsewhere in this universe coming to visit us?
Well, I think, this is a massive subject, isn't it? I think it's unlikely that the probability surely would say there must be other life out there. There are trillions of planets. Just in our galaxy, there are trillions of planets, and there are trillions of galaxies. So there are trillions of trillions of trillions of planets in the universe. The law of probability surely says that there must be more planets out there that have, sentient life on it. So I suspect there is. Whether I think they've actually been visiting us is another question. I think the technology required to cross the massive distances in both distance and time, because remember, some of the variables in the universe are to do with time. The nearest other galaxy to us, Andromeda, is 2.5 million light years away. So it would take 2.5 million years of traveling at the speed of light just to reach a planet and remember, this is the nearest other galaxy to us.
Sure.
So I think it's very unlikely that any species could ever develop the kind of technology required to be able to cross those barriers in distance and time. But at the same time, I believe that there must be other life out there. It's just going to be very hard for us ever to communicate or touch base with it for the aforementioned reasons. But the law of probability surely says, with so many planets and the universe being so big, we can't be alone. We cannot be alone. And that's my personal perspective on it.
Yeah, as they most famously say in the movie Contact, it sure would be a big waste of space, right?
That is true, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know you love focusing on the distances. Your wife is reciting the distances, and that's a real focus of it. But I'm just curious if interdimensionality or some other ways to, shall we say, take a shortcut around that space distance time issue that we can't even really comprehend, but that maybe some quantum physics is hinting at. It would be curious to see if that plays out in the future, but we will see.
Maybe so. And I think that would be the only way to overcome the almost inconceivably large obstacles that are present in the universe. Yeah, somebody would have to
Right.
basically invent something like that to be able to fold time and space. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, speaking of the more esoteric implications of the infinite beauty of outer and inner space, while it can be easy to brush away like a religious concept of a personal God, I mean, how do you account for what is holding all of this vast universe together, which is so beyond our mental capacity?
Well, I think you've kind of answered the question yourself because it is beyond our mental capacity.
Hmm.
And that's the whole point, that it's almost impossible for us to hold these numbers in our mind and to conceive. Human beings have we cannot conceive of anything not having a beginning. And of course, this is one of the reasons that we create the myth of religion. And it is a myth, in my opinion. We've created the myth of religion and the myth of God, because we are unable to conceive of something not having a beginning or an end or a limit. And the point is, the universe is continuing to expand. It is limitless in that fact. And that is impossible for our brains to conceive of. And that is the reality. And I don't suppose we'll ever find a way to conceive of this. It is always there's going to be something completely beyond our realm of understanding. But I embrace that as a beautiful thing. I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, nice. Um, when we spoke during the release of the Future Bites, you had an incredibly ambitious concert tour planned that never
Mm.
came to fruition because of COVID. So, are there elements from that show that you'll be bringing to life now that you're finally going on tour?
Well, that would have been a very different concept. So this obviously this concept, the concept of this show is very much related to the theme. So
Hmm.
whereas the Future Bites was very much an earthbound concept, this is the opposite. So it's going to have a very different look, very different feel to what I would have done perhaps in the Future Bites tour, but it's still going to be very visual, very spectacular, very immersive. It's going to be hopefully a great evening out.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. You were recently in Chile in the Atacama Desert. What was that trip about?
So I have a very good friend who works out in the desert, works at the telescopes out there. So I thought, what better time to take him up on his invitation to go and visit and to be able to, do some social media content relating to the overview while I was out there, which so there was kind of that in the back of my mind. But just to really immerse myself in this whole kind of, notion of space, looking up rather than looking down, um, gazing out into the Milky Way. And one of the most amazing things about going out into the Atacama Desert is you can see the Milky Way. Now, I live in London. I don't know
Hmm.
about you. When I look up in the sky living in London, I don't see anything. There's clouds and there's so much ambient light coming from the city itself. You don't really see space. You don't really see the stars. You can see Venus, perhaps, Alpha Centauri, but you don't see the Milky Way. In Chile, in the middle of the desert, you
Hmm.
look out into the sky, you see it's all there. It's
Wow.
absolutely awe-inspiring and very profound. And in a way, I had my own overview experience, just
Right.
being able to look out and see this laid out in a way that I could never imagine seeing living in London.
Yeah, I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and the Rocky Mountains are here, so we get with that elevation, we get a sense of that awe-inspiring. And
Yeah,
I mean, I can remember, just camping out under the stars away from the other lights. It's just incredible. So yeah, you must have had an amazing overview effect right there, huh?
absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Wow. Um, last year, it seemed that you just mentioned in an interview that you're interested in doing a full album with Ninet. Has that progressed at all?
It hasn't, and for a very simple reason. Ninet is Israeli. She lives in Israel, and the last 18 months, obviously, she's had a lot of other things on her mind with
Sure.
what's going on in Israel right now. So, unfortunately, we haven't even seen each other since the troubles began there. She's been obviously with her family back in Israel.
Hmm.
So, but it's something that I think we definitely want to do at some point. I mean, she's such an inspiring, charismatic powerful force as a singer, and we seem to gel very well, in terms of me writing for her music for her to sing. So fingers crossed that's still on the cards, but for reasons to do with recent history, it hasn't happened yet.
Sure. And did I hear you mention something about Roland working with him, maybe?
Well, Roland and me talked about doing some collaborations. Well, in fact, we talked about maybe writing with for Ninette, together. So there's
Oh,
all sorts of possibilities, all sorts of possibilities. It's one of those things like I have so many things I'd like to do, and only just so many hours in the day, and so many days in the year, and so many years in my life to do all these things. But
right.
lots of possibilities. But I think the answer to your question at the moment on both counts is nothing has progressed yet on those fronts. Yeah. Been
Right.
too busy
Fortunately,
making the overview. Too busy making the overview.
sure, sure. I mean, fortunately for you, you got good role models. Even John Anderson's still out there at 80, touring. And so, you've probably got several decades yet to create. But
I hope so. I hope so. I'm increasingly aware that time is running out the older I get, but again, I embrace that, and I've still got a lot of ideas of things I can do and would like to do. I'd still love to do a movie soundtrack at some point,
mm,
still on my bucket list to do some kind of collaboration with a filmmaker. Yeah.
And it sounds like even Porcupine Tree is leaning more toward continuation than closure at this point.
I think so. I think we'll make another record. I don't know if we tour again, but we really enjoyed, making the record. Again, it's all down to whether we think there's something new we could add to the catalogue that wouldn't simply be more of the same. And I think, going back to our earlier discussion, that's so important to me, but also important to Gavin and Richard too. But I think we have got definitely the potential to make some more music in the studio. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. But as far as doing something you haven't done before, I asked you this about 6 years ago, so I'm just going to find out your current state of mind. Your entire solo band, as well as previous solo band members, are all playing on the annual Cruise to the Edge festival, and they'll probably be getting off the ship, just in time to rehearse with you for your upcoming tour. And there's many musicians on board that like Steve Hackett, Robert Fripp, John Mitchell. So, any interest in joining them one of these years to be a headliner on there?
Um, I'm only sort of vaguely familiar with it. I've certainly heard of it. I don't think it's my thing. I'm not really a fan of festivals per se. I've done a few over the years. I think what I love to do is to create my own kind of world to bring the audience into. Um, and that's why I think I love to do these shows just on my own, where I don't have any support act. The audience arrives, they're kind of brought into my world, and that maybe because I'm a control freak, maybe because I'm a control freak, I like to control the whole experience. So festivals or those kind of events, I've done very rarely over the years. And as I get older, I think I'm less inclined to probably want to do them rather than more inclined.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, just to wrap up, I know you've been invited more into the world of Pink Floyd lately. You got to remix Richard Wright's Wet Dream album, and now you're doing a remix of the Pompeii film. So, anything that surprised you during those two projects?
Well, with the Rick Wright album, what a beautiful record it is, and how much
Yeah.
Pink Floyd DNA is in evidence on that record. And I think when you listen to that record, you understand just how much he did contribute to the band's kind of gestalt, sound. It's all there. With the Floyd project, I mean, I grew up with that movie. I saw it for the first time when I was like 12, 13 years old. It's very deeply ingrained in my DNA, as is the band per se, period. And I think what surprised me about remixing it was how primitive the recording was.
Uh,
A lot of what you're listening to there is just four mono feeds, mono drums, mono bass, mono keyboards, mono guitar. So there wasn't a massive amount I could do, but I cleaned it up as much as I could. I tried to get as much clarity and definition out of it as I could. And also to reflect the fact that they're playing in the outdoors in that film, so there isn't a lot of ambience. It should be, for me, I feel it should be a very dry, upfront, direct sound. So that's how I've sort of approached mixing it. Yeah.
mhm. Do you get to have any direct interaction with David, Nick, or Roger on these things?
Well, I've met them all over the years. David and Nick I've met several times. They, as I'm sure you know, they've now sold their rights to Sony. So
Right.
in a sense, they've kind of washed their hands of the catalog and entrusted it to Sony. And luckily for me, Sony have entrusted me with working certainly on this project. So a little bit. I mean, obviously they were aware I was doing it. They obviously didn't have any problem with that, which is I'll take that as a positive. I'm doing a Q&A with Nick. We're doing a premiere of the film at the BFI IMAX in London next month, and I'm going to be doing a Q&A with Nick. So I think Nick is probably the most engaged of all of them with the reissue.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Well, let's close with what are you looking most forward to in the upcoming tour?
To be honest, just hanging out with these guys every day. I mean, I haven't toured with my solo band since 2018, and
Yeah.
I miss being with such a great bunch of musicians and being able to play with such great musicians every night. And they're great fun. They're all great fun. I don't work with assholes. I'm only interested in working with people I genuinely like on a personal level as well as a musical level. And they're all great guys to hang out with. And it's been a long time. It's been a long time. Can't wait.
Excellent. Well, I'm really glad you've included Denver on the tour, so I'll see you there. And
Brilliant.
yeah, good luck in the coming months. You've got, as I started off by saying, you've got a lot on your plate right now. And I hope that the live stream later today is fantastic. And a lot of people probably watching this interview have already seen it at this point.
Probably quite a few. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All
Anyway,
right.
great. Nice to speak to you, Scott.
You too, Stephen. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, buddy. Cheers for now.
Cheers.
Bye now.